We're joined by Republican nominee for North Carolina Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. Mr. Robinson, thanks for coming by.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
The most basic, fundamental question you can ask any candidate: why? Why a lieutenant governor?
Well, we were asked early on about running for another office that we didn't think really was the right thing to do. But I suppose you know about the city council speech that happened, that went viral, that I gave back in 2018. It provided me with an opportunity to make some changes and do some things. But when we looked at the position of lieutenant governor, we thought that it fit our particular set of skills just right. And we decided that there would be no better thing to do to step up and run for office, put our money where our mouth was, so to speak, and really try to affect some positive changes. So we decided to throw a hat in the ring for this position.
What are the skills that you think best match you with lieutenant governor?
Well, as lieutenant governor, one of the things that, as you know, in North Carolina, it's what some people describe as a bully pulpit. You get an opportunity to push some agendas. And we feel like we have a strong voice, and we feel like we can use that voice to advance some agendas that we think need to be highlighted here in North Carolina.
I watched that Republican primary, and there was, U.S. House members, there was a sitting council of state, the superintendent of education, people who have won elections, big elections, were in that race, and you defeated them. What was it about your candidacy that attracted Republican voters to try change?
I think it was a combination of three things. Number one thing, I think, was our message. Our message was simple, straight to the point. And then there was our staff. We have a young, highly motivated staff that did a fantastic job all throughout the primary, continues to do a fantastic job. And then there was our volunteer base. I am blown away every day by the amount of people who want to get on board with our campaign and help us reach victory. And I think those are the three components that help us to reach victory in the primary.
Yeah, you're right about the bully pulpit part of the lieutenant governor. I've covered the Senate. It's a big, loud position with very little political power. I have to ask you, what's your relationship with Senate Republican leaders? And I might as well say Senate Democratic leaders, because it is 2020. Who knows what's going to happen?
Well, I have a very good relationship with members of the Senate. Met them. Of course, on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, I have not met many. But I'm sure once we get into office, we'll be able to work with those folks to do the best that we can for the people of North Carolina.
Well, what issues are you going to push if you're elected and you start using that bully pulpit?
The number one social issue for me is protecting the lives of the unborn. We talk about that all across the state. Of course, protecting our Second Amendment for law-abiding citizens in this nation. We stand up firmly for that. When it comes to education, we are strong on education. We want to revamp education, get education back more into the camp of being actual education and away from indoctrination. And then, of course, we want to stand up for our veterans. I have a sincere heart for our veterans in this state, and think that North Carolina should set its sights on becoming the gold standard of veterans care in the nation. And then, of course, I also want to stand up strong for law enforcement and law and order.
How did you develop your philosophy? You have a biography that there's videos out there. Anyone can look that up. But over your lifetime, what led you to become a conservative and then become a Republican and now a statewide candidate?
Well, growing up in our family, we never talked about politics when I was young. We talked about what was right and wrong, what was fair and unfair. And we always based what was fair and unfair on our faith. We leaned back on the teachings of our faith, our Christian faith. As I became a young man, I discovered that I was a conservative and had been my entire life. And after studying the two parties, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and the histories thereof, I fell firmly on the side of the Republican Party, because I truly believe the Republican Party is the party of freedom and equality and always has been.
I noted the speech you gave in Guilford County, the Greensboro City Council, that was about the Second Amendment. There's one issue between you and your opponent, and it's the Second Amendment, where there is a huge difference. Your opponent supports the red flag laws on the perception of that people can be dangerous and you might need to report them. You are very staunchly pro-Second Amendment. Explain why that's such a strong issue for you, why you would bring that to Raleigh.
Well, protecting people's Second Amendment rights is one of the fundamental it's one of the fundamental rights of the constitutional republic. I describe armed citizens, law-abiding armed citizens in this state, in this nation, as our citizen arsenal. It protects our freedom. It really does. If you look back at the history of the Second Amendment, there have been times when law-abiding citizens have desperately needed to have those weapons, and when they had them at their disposal, they were able to defend themselves against all types of folks, whether they be domestic terrorists, whether they be invading armies, or whatever the case may be. So holding on to that Second Amendment is crucial to holding on to our freedom, I believe.
The pro-life debate's well-defined between many Republicans and Democrats. I won't push too far there, but you do say you want to create a gold standard of care for our veterans with a couple of VA hospitals here. Whether or not the General Assembly can do that unilaterally, what is your vision of gold standard care for our veterans?
It entails a lot of things, but I could tell you this. Two things that I would really like to see. I know there are some particulars when it comes to taxing our veterans' pensions. Some of them are taxed and some of them are not taxed. I would like to see the tax on veterans' pensions completely wiped away. Become the 10th state that doesn't have any tax on veterans' pensions. Also would like to create some programs, more programs, that will allow veterans to have immediate access to care. I've met veterans across the state who struggle to get care, and we cannot allow that anymore. I think those are the two things that we need to start with. But there are a myriad of things that I believe that we could do to increase veterans' care, and also to increase the care to encourage veterans to stay here when they retire.
Let's talk about the blue. Standing up for law enforcement is the slogan you're using as part of your campaign. What do you mean by that? What does it mean to stand up for law enforcement in this climate?
To me, it all starts with pushing back against some of the false narratives that we see being pushed against our police officers, standing up against some of the radical groups that we see now destroying our major cities and encouraging lawlessness. You know, one of the things that I think desperately needs to be highlighted is the difference between a protester and a criminal. A protester is what we saw in Virginia with the Second Amendment protests we saw there. 20,000 people going up to Virginia, proclaiming their rights to own firearms, leaving and not leaving a scrap of trash after they left. What we're seeing in these major cities around the country now, that is not protest. That is complete chaos. It is criminal activity. We need to draw that distinction, and we need to stand firmly on the side of law and order.
Tell me about the police. You know, that's what makes the headlines. It's police brutality. Is that even an issue, or is that a narrative that's being generated somewhere else, or is there something to look into to say, hey, maybe the police could look at being reviewed a bit to see how they're approaching certain situations?
We need to always keep our law enforcement under scrutiny, and law enforcement, of course, needs to scrutinize itself, and I believe they do a very good job of that. But one of the things for me that I think is very egregious when we talk about violence in communities, we're examining police brutality under a microscope while we are ignoring the massive amounts of violence that's going on in neighborhoods, and it's just going unchecked. And as we continue to browbeat the police and continue to degrade the police, we see that violence in those neighborhoods continue to go up. And I think that's what we really need to be examining. We really need to be examining the violence in these communities that we're seeing instead of putting this microscope on the police departments.
Talk about political climate in Raleigh. If you join it, you have a strong platform. You're not backing away from any issue I'm asking you. However, there's people on the left that are going to be just as adamant about their position. How do you bridge some of these gaps? And even if you disagree, how do you create a better climate?
I think that there are a lot of issues right now that it just boils down to really just common sense, particularly when we talk about things like defunding the police. It boils down to simple common sense. If we defund the police, if we degrade our police departments, the most vulnerable people, the poorest communities are going to suffer first. We need to understand that. Both Republicans and Democrats need to understand that. And we need to come together and understand on these issues how we can reach this common ground to make sure that these people are protected.
Why should Democrats consider Mark Robinson for lieutenant governor? Republicans are hearing everything they want to hear. What about those Democrats out there?
Because I am truly trying to go to Raleigh to stand up for everybody. This is not about Republicans. It's not about Democrats. This is about standing up for North Carolinians, making sure that North Carolinians' rights are protected, and making sure that we move forward under some real progress that's going to be good for the entire state.
Coronavirus, let me ask you about this. This whole mask debate rages on Facebook more than anywhere else, and you hear people getting kicked out of stores. Some people are fearful to be around folks who don't wear masks. For many, it's a rights issue. For others, it's a common sense health issue. Where do you fall on that? And because it is infiltrating or it is influencing policy.
It is. For me, it all boils down to the individual. The individual being able to do what they feel is best for them. Now, that being said, if there is a private business that requires you to wear a mask, then you should wear a mask because that business has a right to establish its policies. But I think what it all boils down to is leaving it to the individual. If I don't want to go to a business because they require a mask, then you shouldn't, you have that right. If you feel comfortable wearing a mask out, you should be able to wear it. If you don't, you shouldn't have to. But I think it all boils down to leaving it into the hands of North Carolina's citizens and letting them make the decisions for their own health care and themselves.
Now, your background as an adult, as a veteran, as a small business owner, which influences you most as a leader? The discipline of the military or the free enterprise of a small business owner?
I think a little bit of both. Because both places require the same amount of discipline and both require the same amount of so-called creativity. So I think both.
Tell me about this video on Facebook. People saw it. It put you on the map. How long did it take you to realize, or other people to realize, you could be a potential leader based off one speech that was recorded before Greensboro City Council?
That happened almost immediately. I started getting comments of people saying that I should run for office. But at that particular time, that was not anything on my radar. I had not, as a matter of fact, I was firmly against running for office. But over time, I realized that running for office was the best thing to do because I really feel like that if I want to make some positive changes for this state and help this state to continue to be free and prosperous, that we need to get in and make that change at a state level.
This is Mark Robinson. He is the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor. It's an open race. Mr. Robinson, thank you for making the trip out of the Triad to speak to North Carolina voters.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure being here.